Welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. This series explores the design of a creature I have built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The stat block for this creature can be found over on the Monster Monday blog, as well as the Twitter and Discord, all of which are linked below. It has been a bit, but I finally have a new original monster to present. Delightfully depicted by the drawings of the one and only SethMonster, this week features the Painted Whelp. This is the juvenile form of a larger creature group that I have created called the Primordial Painters. They are a species of Fae that actually end up drawing a bit from the Galarian lore, specifically about the First World, the realm of the Fae, which was the testing grounds of the gods. This is a place where they first made things before creating the final product in the material realm. And I figured one of the things in the First World were the first instances of color. These colors, these first colors, these primordial pigments, can not only be linked to certain emotions, but contact with them can warp the mind and even the body. However, primordial painters are uniquely adapted to handle these pigments, using them to create art, the definition of which may vary from painter to painter. Today specifically, we're looking at the youngest form of the primordial painter, the Painted Whelp. These whelps wield only a single pigment, lacking the capability or maturity to handle more, and they were actually where my idea started, mainly because I wanted to build a lower level creature. However, as I conceptualized it, as I put it all together, I realized that I needed to expand its concept. The idea of these primordial pigments couldn't be locked down to just a single level 2 monster. So there will eventually be more of these guys, but the Painted Whelp is all I've got for now. As a youngster, as a juvenile, the Painted Whelp is a bit smaller and a bit more spry, which is demonstrated through a high dexterity bonus as we start getting into its ability scores. On the other hand, it does only have a low strength, intelligence, and wisdom, since it is a young and not fully developed creature. At a moderate value is its charisma, relating to its artistry and some of that youthful precociousness. With its low wisdom, it might seem odd for it to use a moderate perception bonus, but the idea here is that the whelp, even from this young age, admires and appreciates the artistry of the world around it. It's always on the lookout for the next vision to use as an inspiration, or to create a tableau from. On that note, the Painted Whelp has a high art lore skill. It also happens to have a high acrobatics skill, but that's more indicative of its natural agility, rather than any dedication to the craft. It also has a moderate crafting and stealth skill, the former relating a bit to its art, while the latter allows the painter to prowl about, pulling pranks or setting up scenes. For once, I've built a creature, not just an NPC, that uses gear, as the whelp is armed with a slingshot, which we'll get into further when we get to its attacks. Before that, however, is the whelp's defenses. A high armor class is inspired by its high dexterity, as well as its size, being a difficult denizen to pin down. It favors a moderate pool of hit points as a sort of counter to this harder to hit capability, but during the monster mash, the whelp just happened to get hit with 2 natural 20s in as many rounds. Despite being a Fae, I passed on the inclusion of any resistances or weaknesses. Maybe when it matures more I'll add some, which means that we are left with saving throws to look over. Now based on its high dexterity, we are using a high reflex save, with its will at the other end of the spectrum with only a low value. In between these is a moderate fortitude save based on its 1 point higher in constitution, and I think this plays in pretty well. Kids are surprisingly resilient and fairly nimble, but their minds are still developing. They need nurturing, and that lower will save helps to represent that. But on the other hand, kids are cruel.
And kids are cruel.
Or so I've heard. And so the Painted Whelp, of course, has some attacks that it can make. That isn't entirely the point of this creature. The whelp's a bit of a troublemaker, not a fighter, so it uses only a moderate attack bonus for both of its attacks, and they also only deal low damage. Both rely on its dexterity, and while the sling has range, it also has the reload trait, slowing it down, unlike the fist agile trait, which encourages multiple strikes with it in a round. Even still, the whelp isn't entirely conceived as a combatant, and part of that is why it comes with a few spells. These primal and innate spells use a high DC, and are largely themed around colors and art. Dizzying Colors is the most obvious, this being a remastered version of the previous color spray, but Prestidigitation also allows for some recoloring. Puff of Poison talks about releasing a colorful puff, and Figment lets it paint a pretty picture. These are all pretty basic options, they really are more flavorful than anything, but it is something that may be more fully explored in the future iterations of this creature. However, far more central to the Whelp's kit is its splatter ability. This has the Whelp dig into its bag of primordial pigment and lob it at a target. Now, as I've said, there are 6 colors, but the Whelp only has access to a single pigment chosen by the GM when they decide to use them. As 2 action, the painted Whelp can splatter a creature with the range of a bomb, and force that creature to make a save against a DC between high and extreme. The effects vary based on the color used, but leave the enemy with an effect that can only be ended by cleaning off the paint as a single action. The single action allows them to make another reflex save at the same DC as before. As a fun little thing, using soap for this process provides a small item bonus. Now, as to the colors and effects, I stuck with the primary colors and the most basic of secondary colors, and used some classics to determine what they did. Blue is sorrow, since that's what feeling blue is. It leaves you in a malaise and fatigued. My original idea for green was envy, but I struggled to make that work. It actually ended up looking a little bit like the confused state, so I settled on disgust and the sickened condition instead. Orange was a harder choice as it's actually often associated with more positive aspects, but its association with Halloween and autumn, my favorite season but one of decay, left me using the drained condition. My interpretation of purple is a little bit looser, but I really like the idea of making a creature fascinated with a random other creature to simulate the whole feelings of love and the like. Now, while that one was a little bit harder to figure out, red was super easy. Seeing red is rage and fury, and that's best represented through the confused condition causing the victim to lash out at random targets. Finally, yellow was inspired by some old color psychology that I remembered about yellow causing hunger, which is why it's used by so many fast food franchises. These are all fairly minor effects with no damage, and a single Whelp can only inflict one of them, meaning that the painted Whelp can't overwhelm a creature with conditions. This leads to the DC between extreme and high, but a gang of painted Whelps that each use a different color. Well, that's another story entirely. Once the Whelp has a creature splattered with paint, it can trigger marked targets. This is a passive effect that allows it to exploit its intrinsic connection to the paint, marking a creature, and its emotional state to deal a teensy bit of extra damage. This manifests as mental damage but with only a D4, which means its attacks are increased to a moderate damage. In the Monster Mash we talked about using this to inflict off guard, but with a number of its splatter effects already decreasing AC, a bonus to damage felt more relevant and handy for the creature. The Whelp's final ability is Color Toss, a reaction that happens after a Whelp has taken a hit. In a panic response, the Whelp flings ordinary paint at its attacker's eyes. The attacker must then make a high DC reflex save, and, hopefully, become dazzled or blinded. This makes it harder to land hits on the painted Whelp, but removing it is only a single action that doesn't require a save or anything like it. This does hopefully help protect the painted Whelp, but mostly just adds to the host of conditions that it can inflict, and also rounds out the design for this Fae. This painting prankster plasters people with potent pigments, pestering them with plentiful penalties. There is an intent to make more powerful versions of this creature in the future, but I'm not entirely certain where I want to go with them yet. For the time being, enjoy this lower leveled little dude, and have fun tormenting your players with the effects that they can throw out. Now, normally the painted Whelp only has a single paint to throw, but it could be fun to throw an entire clan of painted Whelps at a party, and have each of them wielding a single different pigment. I am real happy with this idea with this whole creature, but be sure to let me know what you think of it, and what other sorts of creatures you'd like to see in a comment. If you want to check out the other versions of this monster, or other monsters I've made, check out the blog or Discord, which are linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.